Hey everyone, welcome to another Q&A. Joined with Jamie this morning. Jamie, it seems like all of Romans is so deep, and every chapter just has so much. And this week was no different, especially in the ways in which it's addressing a lot of issues that are in our culture and that we struggle with personally. And so there's a lot of encouragement that came from it. And how you really tied it together in Christ's return. But before we maybe ask you a few questions about that, why don't you remind the listeners of your sermon from yesterday?
Yeah, it's like I said, the end of chapter 13 really serves as a bookend as to what began with at the beginning of Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, it begins with, therefore, brethren, in view of God's mercy, offer yourselves as living sacrifices. So, in other words, it's saying live this way because of what has already been done. And the way this section ends right here, this 2-chapter section at the end of 13, it's now basically saying, therefore, in view of what is to come, and Christ's return, this is how we're to live our lives. So you kind of get it on both ends of the spectrum. Is that right there in that middle, you have loving our neighbors, being hospitable, being transformed by the renewed reminds all of that, and it begins with let's look back to the past and why we should do this, and now it's looking to Christ's second coming as another motivation for holy living.
So kind of at the beginning of your passage, it's bringing up time, the aspect of
Right.
time. And it's also kind of tying that in with a few sins to avoid. How does time, in one sense, kind of reveal our weaknesses, but also help us in strengthening our longing for the Lord's return?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can see with regards to sin is that then in some ways, because obviously God is not the author of sin, nor does He cause us to sin, but in God's sovereign grace, He uses sin to point out our weaknesses, to cry out for Him. I mean, we think about many things that we see throughout the Bible. You had Jacob's hip that was touched to remind him of his need of God and of his pride. We see Paul talking about his thorn in the flesh that's continually there to remind him of God's grace and His presence in his life. And we all have different struggles. And I went through those lists of sins, and we had the one with regards to drunkenness and orgies. That word in there conjures up all sorts of different images. What that is pointing towards is the ways in which people try to find joy in their lives. It may be a short-lived joy, but it's nothing that's going to last, and it can actually take us to places we would never ever want to go. When we think about the sexual sins that are listed there, ultimately, what sex is a pointer to is to intimacy, a desire for that, and that can only be found in Jesus Christ. And then even the quarrelsomeness and the jealousy that's mentioned there, which seems to be a little more garden variety, of which we see everywhere, almost every day. It's pointing to the fact that when we argue for things and we're quarrelsome and we're jealous and we're bitter, it's often because we feel like that someone's got their thumb on us and they're keeping us down, and we don't have the place that we rightfully deserve. When the gospel tells us that through Jesus Christ, we are sons and daughters of the living God. We are co-heirs with Jesus Christ. We are future heirs of the new heavens and the earth with Him, and will reign with Him for forever. So again, it's looking at things in a real sense of what our real struggles really are. But we need to see our struggles in light of Christ's return.
You gave a great illustration with kind of the wedding party, especially the bride and her room and the buzz that's all happening to anticipation for this wedding. Living here on earth is difficult. And sometimes we don't really, because we're bogged down on the difficulty, we're missing the wedding to come. How would you encourage people in trying to have that same mindset as the bride, as she's eagerly excited and waiting for that marriage and that wedding day?
Yeah, one verse I forgot to mention is in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25, where I don't have it right here in front of me. I don't have it memorized perfectly, but it's encouraging us not to forsake the gathering together, as some are in the habit of doing, but all the more as we see the day approaching. So it's encouraging us as believers to gather together in light of what is to come. And it really should give us an exhortation and encouragement to think about everything that we do, the words that we speak, how we interact with other people, whether they are believers or non-believers, is that the great culmination of history is when Jesus Christ is going to return, and every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Every man, woman, child, past, present, and future will do so, and it's upon us as those that have been given the grace by Jesus Christ, who have been given new hearts and new minds. So when we speak to people and how we treat people and everything, that we are preparing people for the coming of the King.
Man, it is amazing how quick I can forget about the Lord is coming to return. Yeah, and how without that hope, I mean, we were lost.
Absolutely.
Well, great word, great illustration with that wedding feast, just to really remind people of he's returning.
Yes.
He's coming to renew all things, and that's what we have forward to look to. As always, if you have any questions that you've heard from a sermon or a topic that you would love to discuss here, we would love to hear from you. And thank you for your support at Cahaba Park.